Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this council meeting for May 28th. We respect and recognize the First Nations within whose unceded lands the village of Kaslo is situated, including the Tanaha, the Snipes, and the Siletz people, and the Indigenous and Métis residents of our community. Order. So can we have a motion to adopt the agenda if there's no additions? By Councillor Bird, seconded by Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried, and a motion to adopt the minutes of the May 14th meeting of council. Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Lang. All those in favor? Carried. We have no delegations. So we're going to welcome, I should have started with welcome our CAO who's participating remotely, and welcome to our guests tonight. So we'll move into council reports. I have not provided a written report for this meeting, but I did attend the regional district meeting where we adopted the budget, and hopefully the council board meeting in after, when is it, the 17th, I believe. No, anyhow, that the week after FCM, I will get the book, and then I'll be able to provide a copy to staff so they have a full copy of all of the services that the village participates in. And I just was in Golden for 4 days for Columbia Basin Trust meetings, which were very interesting. Of course, I can't, again, something that I can't report on. I will provide the report that staff gives once they produced it. So I keep council informed in that way. Other than that, there hasn't been a lot. Well, May Days happened, which was very successful, I think. The weather was actually good. A few iffy times, but otherwise, a lot of people, and I've never seen people parking on the side of the road going up Bay Avenue. I thought that was strange. Even with Jazz Fest, I don't remember that happening. So people are desperate to be parked close to where they're going to go. Council reports. Councillor Brown.
None at this time.
All right, thank you. Councillor Lang.
No, nothing for me.
Good.
Nothing for me either. Just a couple of the library meeting. They're getting ready for the summer. They've got programs happening, and there'll be some more kind of community programs in the fall. And kind of looking towards next steps with the library. And Irina had a pretty successful law report. It was pretty busy, and people definitely like to enjoy their beverages.
Right, thank you. One thing I forgot to mention is that weekend that I'll be away for FCM on the 8th and the 7th and 8th, the Langham will be having the major part of their 50th anniversary celebration. There will be drama performances on the Friday night in the Langham, and then the street party on Saturday from noon till 3, and they have coordinated with the Saturday market so that people will hopefully go from one to the other, and we have granted the street closure for that. And then there's going to be a dance at the Legion afterwards. And so during the street party, they will have the Langham open, some of the gallery, some shows in the gallery, and some of the gallery spaces open, so people can go in and see what happens in there. All right, no committee minutes, so staff reports. CAO Baker, do you have a report this evening?
It'll be a brief report for obvious reasons. So the focus for me right now has been planning. So there's a report that I'm expecting from a planning consultant that we haven't used before with respect to the South Beach proposal. And so that report should give us an order of operations that I'd expected to have about a month ago in order to have discussions with the property owner, but didn't work out as planned. So this other consultant should have us an order of operations this week. And I'm hoping to have a phone call with the property owner before Friday so that what we've received as information matches the path forward that makes sense for them. And the goal is still to be able to come to council for the June 11th meeting with information for you to review, understand the processes to move forward and what mechanisms we can use, and then start proceeding through with negotiation and ultimately allow the second reading of the zoning application to proceed. So at this point, I don't have any concerns. It's just taken a slightly different road to get where we're going. And on the same topic of planning, there's a couple of subdivision applications that have been sitting with the city for a few weeks now. So the intention is to get to those as soon as possible. And I've also asked for some help from a third party on those as well to give us information. So for the June 11th council meeting, you should see some staff reports for development variance permits coming to you. And the last item I've been working on would be the annual municipal report, which is going to form the bulk of our committee of the whole conversation today. Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. Sorry, I can't hear. I know you're talking, but I can't hear. I still don't have any audio.
Oh, no, this is good.
And
I
now,
hear some audio now.
There,
Okay,
how about now?
you can hear
I can hear you now. Thanks.
it. All right.
I wonder what happened, because you had been able to hear me previously, haven't you?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll keep our eye on those little green lights.
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, Councillor Brown.
For the third party, for South Beach, where did we find this third party? Like, how do we go about deciding who we would use in that scenario?
The cost of that third party is minimal. And so we didn't shop around. We're using someone that we've used in the past that the village is familiar with. And yeah, the amount of work they would have had to put into reviewing it and offering their commentary would have been, less than $1,000.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions for the CAO? Thank you. All right, next is the permissive tax exemption report. Are there any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward and it outlines the timelines for what has to happen. Councillor Bird.
yes, through the chair. So I have no issue with the timelines. I do wonder if the application form has already been printed numerous times? As it is like ready to go, or it's still just in
It is just within the PDF. Is there something that you'd like corrected?
well, and not so much corrected as it occurs to me that it's sort of non-specific in areas that I think is important to the village. And I'll just give you some examples. So in the organization information, so that's 2F, and paraphrasing, is membership in your organization reasonably open to all residents? I think it should say residents of Kaslo. And I think it's a debate whether we should say residents of Kaslo in area D. But I just find it a little non-specific for the purpose. The purpose is
we're offering an exemption from a considerable sum of money, and it's from us, and just the fact that we have our letterhead at the top. Is that enough, you know? If you, for instance, had a music school where all your students and members flew in from California. I mean, it's not like that's likely, but it's like we are giving a permissive tax exemption, assuming that it's going to benefit the people that we serve. So I just thought being a little more specific. How many members does your organization serve? How many members of Kaslo and or Area D, which I think is something we could talk about, or are we just talking Kaslo? How does, oh, and the other one that I thought I noticed in the community charter that that council has, it's all about we may grant permissive tax exemptions. There's no hard line. But they do talk about the building and the land separately. And so it's conceivable that, and this is something that came up in one of our conferences, it's conceivable that a church, say, would have a fair bit of land that is not being used, or a hospital perhaps has a fair bit of land that could be used, but it's not being used. And are we going to necessarily grant an exemption? Because when it comes to talking about the property, there's no distinction made in the application between the improvement and the land. So.
So the differences between the improvements of the land and information that we get from the assessment authority. So we don't need to ask that of the applicants because we already have access to that information because it's determined by assessment. So we would put the report, that's what we get that breakdown.
So what we're not asking them is the entire, I'm sorry.
Through the chair. Yeah, go ahead.
So what we're not asking is if the entire building, if the entire property is being used for the purpose noted in section 2.
I think we asked them for the uses of the property and whether there was anything else happening on the property that generated revenue that would be separate from that. I think we did ask that in the application.
Through the chair. We're not asking them if there are unused portions for which, why should we grant permissive tax exemption for land that is not being used for the purpose? Not being used at all, for instance.
I'm not totally sure I understand.
So this did come up in one of the.
So are you talking about if there's green space on their property or driveways? Like, I guess I think the corporate officer is also struggling with where are you wanting to go with it? What the purpose of the question is. There any space will have unused land surrounding it because of our rules for building, right? You can't build right to fill your whole property. Is there's got to be extra land somewhere. And are you thinking if it's used for a purpose that is generating them revenue, so therefore they shouldn't receive an exemption? I guess that's
already in there.
Okay, so I guess struggling with the purpose of the question.
Well,
go ahead.
the hospital, for instance, has a great deal of land, which a portion of it is not being used, which could be used for the expansion of the hospital. And we're granting the hospital, IHA, tax, an exemption for taxes on every square inch of property and building.
So a couple things. The interior health one I'm not very familiar with. to know exactly what is being exempted, because they would be eligible for a statutory exemption. So I'm not totally clear on why this one is being listed as a permissive exemption. I'm sure that there is some history behind that. I just haven't had a chance to look into it yet. Similarly with the churches, like the church is going to be exempt, but sometimes the parking lot is not. And so that's why there is a permissive exemption in there. So there's actually a portion that is a statutory exemption as well as a permissive exemption for all of the churches. I think that there are some things that are coming up. So one of the things in the application is that it says that the village can request additional information if required. And part of what we were trying to do when we created the application form was balance that desire for detail with the burden that we are placing on these volunteer organizations to complete the application process. So I think that I've tried to include enough space in the timeline that will allow the summary to come back to council. And then there will be time for council to say, on this specific one, I would like more information about this before we decide the value of the exemption we are or are not willing to grant that. So I think that certainly the changes about residents of Kaslo and adding that sort of like Kaslo in Area D messaging in the questions, I think that can be relatively easy to fix, and we can certainly do that for getting the application packages out. But I think that some of the things that you're asking about are maybe more appropriate when that summary report comes back to council, to try and then get specific details about one particular property or another, rather than asking for something that may not be really applicable to all of them. That seems acceptable.
So I'll go to you, Councillor Leaflet, and then I'll make a comment.
I was basically kind of asking the same thing as you.
Just, okay, Councillor Lang?
Yeah, so this application process, this is new, right?
This was done in 2021. So if anybody has received a permissive tax exemption in 2022 to 2024 and wants to request a copy of their 2021 application, the village would certainly provide that to them. And if there have been no changes in your operations, that certainly makes your application process a little bit easier.
Good. So, this will be a question for, I believe, yourself, Corporate Officer Alloway. Section 224, isn't that, like, government doesn't tax government typically, right? So that an Interior Health is an agent of the Ministry of Health. So I'm assuming that that is why, because it is listed under a section 224 exemption at the bottom, along with the regional district of Central Kootenai for the emergency services building up next to the arena. So that maybe wasn't the prime example to use for demonstrating what the point might be there. So I think, the only other concern, well, maybe it is or isn't a concern, is the value of the permissive tax exemptions. Having talked to other directors around the table who are municipal directors, we are so generous in our exemptions that they are double and triple what other municipalities offer, and municipalities of much larger size than Kaslo. So, and I think that's why the application was brought into play a few years ago, is trying to have those organizations formally recognize that the value of their exemption is a contribution by the village. It's the same, it's like a grant, but many of the organizations that receive it do not recognize it with them as a sponsor. They don't list them as sponsors when they're talking about events sponsored by. And so it was just to have them recognize that it does have a financial value, and it costs every taxpayer in the municipality and any property in the municipality. It does cost them money, and we choose to support all of them. And, like anything, not everybody would do it on their own. We don't give them a choice because we, as a council, choose to support our not-for-profits in that manner. Other questions, anything that you would like Corporate Officer Alloway to change or consider before the correspondence goes out to organizations?
Sorry, was that question for me?
Well, either of you,
Go-
well,
No,
actually, it
sorry.
was,
Oh,
it-
okay, sorry. My apologies.
oh, no worries. It is a little harder participating online for sure. I was asking council if they thought they wanted anything else put in the application or any other considerations. So, all right, so then we'll move on to correspondence. We have a letter from the Kaslo Housing Society and from the Kaslo and Area Senior Citizens. And any discussion on either of those? Councillor Bird.
Yes, through the chair, I'm not going to be very brief about this, but just to put it in your head, as far as the Kaslo Housing Society, when we used to always, the society always had a delegate from council. And the idea of having, you know, a representative, just like Matt Brown is a representative for the community forest, is like a two-way communication bridge, so that whatever the community forest feels necessary to like would like to talk to council about or would like council to be aware of, then the representative, in this case Matt, could bring that forward. And also on the flip side, if there was ever a recommendation or a direction from council to bring information to the community forest, that Councillor Brown is the one in position to do that, and we can ask him to do so. So once and it was really my idea to stop bothering and having a representative from council go to be a representative at the Kaslo Housing Society. What unintended consequences is what we've realized is we don't really have a mechanism besides becoming a delegation to come to council to tell council what's up with, you know, what's up currently, like just to offer information. The only way we can do that is through letters or through a formal delegation. And so this letter from the chair of the Kaslo Housing Society is in recognition of it would be nice to report to council in some kind of a regular way, and leaving it up to council to maybe find a way that wouldn't take up too much time, but would also make it easier for council to know what is happening with the housing society and potentially ask questions if they have questions. So basically it's a one-way street at this point. I can help the Kaslo Housing Society with the sort of things that council knows, you know, like legislation and when, you know, what's the schedule on perhaps having a Kaslo housing strategy, that sort of thing. I can report to them, but there's no easy way or informal way to report back except through letters or formal delegations.
So perhaps a mechanism could be to have the minutes shared. Anything that was not discussed in camera, because the problem with that is if any actions are being requested from either side, it should be in the form of a formal correspondence, not just one member of council relaying their view of the information received. If it's factual information, that a document could be provided to back up the information that's being given, but it wouldn't be something that could be considered written in stone just because there's a representative at that organization. And so that's my thoughts on that, but CEO Baker, what are your thoughts?
So when reading the letter from the Housing Society, it didn't occur to me that what Councillor Bird has just described, that it might make sense to have them appearing as a delegation more often to maintain the relationship and give council updates on what's going on in their world. And likewise for council to ask questions. When I read the letter, I thought it was more of a, they might have something to propose or something specific, partnership or a project they wanted to work on. So now that I have a clear understanding, at least from Councillor Bird's perspective of how we could interpret the letter, I'd say absolutely. Let's set up a time for them to come as a delegate and share with us what they have going on, and we can ask questions about ways in which we can support them. So I think that's something that our corporate officer can help facilitate, if that would provide any value. Mayor Hewitt?
Yeah, Corporate Officer Allen?
Yeah, I would suggest that, as you said, that having minutes circulated and we put them in a certain pack, that's how we treat a lot of the local organizations that have things that they want council to stay abreast of. And the other is that if there is a specific request, a delegation might be a good starting point, but also scheduling a committee of the whole meeting so that council can engage in discussion, because a delegation is really designed for a group to present information. It's not intended as a two-way street. So a committee of the whole is maybe the forum that we're looking at, but in order to have an effective committee of the whole meeting, there needs to be a fair bit of information that's provided in advance so that there's some meat to the discussion. So yeah, that can certainly be scheduled, and I can engage with the Housing Society to see when that would be best from their perspective. I think that we did meet just before, on the Thursday before May Days. So we had a staff level meeting with them just to outline processes and give them a bit more information. It was only with 2 of the board members, but just to give them a bit of a sense of what the process could be for some options. But they're also holding their cards kind of close, so we're waiting for them to be ready to discuss things in open meeting.
Councillor Grant?
Through the chair. I read that letter as, we've now kind of taken on Penny Lane, we've incorporated it into everything we're doing, and we're ready for the next thing. And just kind of inquiring as to what that next thing might be. Might there be an opportunity looking at the official community plan for Kaslo South, when we start looking at the housing opportunities or things we might want to do with that, to bring the Kaslo Housing Society in on those conversations, or to at least confer with them about their thoughts, as that's probably one of the housing things that we've identified that we're going to be looking at.
So I think that would be more the village would identify the development potential, and then perhaps they could be brought in, but CEO Baker?
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. Absolutely, we'd want to engage with the Housing Society when we're looking at planning for Kaslo South. So absolutely, they'd want to be, we'd want to engage with them on that conversation. Thank you, Mayor Hewitt.
You're welcome. All right, anything else on that Housing Society correspondence? Right, and the one regarding seniors that had come in, I think just past the deadline, but CAO Baker and I had spoken to the chairperson or the president of the Seniors Association, and they worked on a solution for this very issue. So I think things worked out well as far as I could tell. And thank you, CAO Baker, for facilitating that and getting them connected with the car club and the Chamber of Commerce to make it work for them. Because it sounded like they had a successful tea and on that day, which was their concern, that people would not be able to access the facility.
Through the chair,
I read the letter as a request for paving,
Yeah.
50 feet
Oh,
of
it's
the
the pave,
alleyway.
that's the pave, okay, it's the follow-up to the paving, okay, that was, all right, sorry about that. So, Theo Baker, to you then, because I think you did have discussions with the president of the society.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Hewitt. So the suggestion was that when we do other large paving projects within the municipality, that we either have an area paved so that they can reach their side door for those with mobility challenges, whether they're in a wheelchair or just walking. And potentially that paving could be kind of a donation provided by the paving company. So the challenge we have is that right now I'm not sure when the paving contractor is coming through, and the paving that we do have planned for the areas that had water connections performed this spring, it's quite a small scope. And so I don't know if we'd have enough to ask them to donate this additional paving. Nonetheless, I like to get a good deal and value. So Jeff, our public works foreman, and I are going to chat and see what he can do. And if it doesn't look like we can pull something off for this year, then I had intended to reach out to the business community and see if they'd be able to donate supplies, materials, labor to help put in a paved surface to get to that door. Kind of recognizing that there's a lot of good people that are a part of that senior center, and they obviously have connections with businesses around town. And I think people might like to step up and help make it happen. Thank you, Mayor Hewitt.
Councillor Brown?
The chair, when we're looking at our accessibility committee and our accessibility plan, might it be prudent to take an inventory of any other areas that seniors might, that are village owned or that seniors might need access to, so that if we are installing a ramp or doing any work, perhaps there might be some economies of scale if we were to do a few of them, once we identified the areas that were lacking that access?
Corporate Officer Allen?
I was just gonna say that I had already saved the letter and referred it to the accessibility committee. We'll see where it goes.
And then there's the circulation package. Are there any items that council was like pull from the circulation package? Right, so then that information is received. So we'll move on to question period. And I see you, Shannon, you've had your hand up for quite a while. It's time for questions now. So if you have one, you can go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Mayor Hewitt. Hello, Kaslo counselors. I'm just here. I was curious if I wasn't sure where I was on the agenda, but I was informed to show up today in regards to the Kaslo Pride celebration. And I just wanted to double check about a few things. Is that okay to do here?
Yes, because during the business portion of the meeting, you won't be able to engage in discussion. So if you have questions at this point, you can go ahead.
Okay, great. So it's kind of like the same thing that it's been every year, looking for to waive the fee for the Legacy Park rental on the morning of June 8th. Looking for the road closure on June 7th, starting at 2:30 until I think it's 9 or 9:30 a.m. And then the high visible, wanting to borrow the high visible vests. And then if there could possibly be like a quick road cleaning in that area the day before we go to paint. We usually do a mopping or a sweep, but sometimes depending, I mean, it's been raining a lot, but sometimes there's just a lot and it's nice to get it hosed down or something, perhaps the day before. And I think that's it. So I just wanted to double check that we'll have somebody representing the village for the celebration on the 8th. And then all of the other pieces.
All right, so all of that except for the representation was in your request letter, so those items are on our agenda for discussion.
Okay,
So thank you, Shannon. And so we'll be moving into business. If there are no other questions, we'll be moving right into our business items.
okay, yeah, that's it.
Were there any other questions from the public or from the Valley Voice at this time?
I don't really get a question. I'm standing from the curling club, standing Oregon, just to make sure that you guys know, if you have any questions on item 7.2, which is our request to withdraw 15,000 from bylaw 159, I'm here to answer them, but I don't really have any questions for you, and hopefully everything you need to know is already in what you got in your packet. But a big thank you, by the way, I don't get a chance to do this very often. Thank you so much to staff for all the work that you do in putting together these packages and all of this other stuff that I know you do. I deal with you enough to know that you do a lot of work behind the scenes.
Thank you, Tammy. That doesn't often happen. Very much appreciated on behalf of staff. All right. Any questions from Valley Voice?
No, thank you. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll move into our business items. The first one is land use amendment bylaw number 1304/2024. So the recommendation is that land use amendment bylaw 1304/2024 be given first and second reading. Moved by Councillor Lang, seconded by Councillor Brown. Any questions? Councillor Bird.
The only questions, through the chair, the questions that I can ask right now are about the readings. Whether
You
we
asked
should-
about the bylaw as well.
Yeah. Okay, I do have a question, and what I noticed for the amendment, there was one, there was a section for residential, like a single and two home residential, where there was a minimum frontage requirement of 15 meters. And bring this up because I used to live on Belfer Crescent, which has a couple of squinty pie-shaped pieces that are big enough to put a septic and a home and a septic. The lot size is quite big, but I'd be surprised if their frontage was 15 meters. They're quite skinny at the road. So is it, if we're doing an amendment like that, I'm not sure why frontage matters. I mean, I totally get it why lot size matters. But is there a reason for restricting having a minimum frontage size? Only thinking there is potentially a couple of building lots in this town that don't have that frontage. And unintended consequences that we would make them non-buildable lots under the bylaw.
Right. Theo Baker, are you able to address that or get an answer from the consultant who's done the work?
I think, thank you, Mayor Hewitt. A couple of things, Corporate Officer Alloway might have some additional commentary. From my perspective, if somebody comes to us and wants to subdivide a parcel and they're not able to meet the minimum lot size, then they have the option of coming to council through a variance and requesting a slightly different lot size. So there are options for property owners if they don't meet the minimum requirements. And maybe just to clarify, are you referencing 50 feet or was there 50 meters referenced in the report?
15 meters.
15.
So
Oh,
15 meters, so 30 odd feet, 31,
Okay.
32.
okay, thank you. Yes, I think I might defer to Councillor or Corporate Officer Alloway to add some additional commentary.
So, I'm less than fully prepared for this question, so I will do my best. It looks to me, so I guess there are a couple of things. The first is that this is just the first of several zoning amendment bylaws that are going to come into force. And it is just intended to adjust the portions of our zoning bylaw, which we already recognized does need updating to align with the OCP. But this is just to meet the imposed deadline of June 30th that the province has said for the SHMU regulations. I can't remember what SHMU stands for. Small multi-unit housing. And so I think that some of those considerations are probably valid and need to be considered, but are not particularly related to this new regulations, which is really what this is just trying to bring us in compliance, and then recognizing that there are additional changes to the bylaw, some of which have been identified by council that we do want to see, and those are going to be coming. But the timelines for getting those all done, that was going to slow things down too much to try to include all of that. So I think that there are some issues around varying it, because you can't use a development variance permit to vary use or density. And so there's some question about whether varying frontage would be considered a variation of density. So I'm not exactly sure on that, but if they're meeting the lot size requirements, that density argument would be null and void. So as CEO Baker said, you would be able to request a variance to section 3.1.2 or A of the bylaw in order to meet that. That's probably all I can offer that's actually factually correct.
Thank you.
Well, and I suspect a bylaw wouldn't typically try to look at absolutely every scenario that could be thrown into the mix, right? Each community is different. And as you indicated in the subdivision where you resided, there were different circumstances, and there might be in other locations as well. And it's not like people have been prevented from building in those locations. And these are probably smaller than the ones that were in existence before in order to incentivize construction.
I think that what it is that so it's small scale multi-unit housing is what SHMU is, but it's easier to say SHMU. So I think that what they're saying is that in areas that are serviced by sewer, you can't really restrict. They want to see more leniency in the minimum lot size that's allowed for construction to facilitate that density and development in areas that are serviced by sewer. The areas that aren't serviced by sewer, if up on the back road, it's going to be dictated by septic requirements. That's what's going to have a much bigger bearing on your minimum lot size and your what's a viable minimum lot size for construction of a dwelling unit. So I think that it's probably something that we should catch as a matter of housekeeping, but I think it's unlikely that it is limited development at this point.
I had read the section under the lot sizes for lots serviced by a sewer system that when it said minimum lot size, no minimum lot size shall apply. And it wasn't until I read further down that it explained that, you know, because I was thinking, how could you build on a 10-foot wide lot, right? And it meet all the setbacks, but it did further on, as I read, explain. So I answered my own question, but I had it jotted down. So yeah, it just sounds interesting when it says there's no minimum lots. That does sound odd, but there are other rules that the factors that come into play that do actually make it have a minimum lot size, but for other reasons. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That motion is carried. Next is the Kaslo Curling Club request for reserve withdrawal from the reserve. The recommendation is that $15,000 be withdrawn from the Kaslo and Area D Property Reserve Fund and awarded to the Kaslo Curling Club for the purchase of new curling rods. Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Leaflet. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. I thought of a question for you, but well, because we're not having an exchange, I'll ask you later. It's more curly, no, that's, we don't have long.
I'm just checking, did we have a vote on 7.1?
Yes, yep, I just did it.
Oh, I thought that was 7.2.
Nope. We just done the moving and seconding. So all those in favor? Motion is carried. And our next item is Kaslo Pride requests. So there are 3 different resolutions. So the first one is that the Kaslo Area Youth Network be granted the permission to paint a rainbow crosswalk on the south side of Front Street at the intersection of 4th Avenue. And it's actually one. And the 4th Street be temporarily closed between Penny Lane and Front Street to permit painting of the rainbow crosswalk and the 2024 Pride celebration and from 2:30 p.m. Friday, June 7th to 9 a.m. Saturday, June 8th, 2024, with alternate dates of June 14th, 15th, or 28th, 29th, if it's raining. And that the village provide a grant in aid of $60 to Kaslo Community Services to offset the cost of renting Legacy Park and obtaining a temporary street closure permit for the 2024 Kaslo Pride celebration. Moved by Councillor Brown, second by Councillor Leafwood. Any discussion? Councillor Leafwood.
I'm just wondering about where we're at with the flag raising.
So, we don't have any mechanisms at this point to install additional flags. Because until we figure out somewhere to fly the Kaslo flag, and then we can look at, once we have a solution for that, we'll see if we can duplicate it for a sort of a flagpole that would accommodate flags that are for a particular purpose or what have you. But at this point, we don't even have a place to fly the Kaslo flag. And we've had a pretty hectic year so far, and so that just hasn't risen to the top of action items, but it is definitely on the list, and we haven't lost sight of it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. And the other thing that that Shannon had asked about is somebody to be present. And that is the weekend that Councillor Leafwood and I will both be in Calgary for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And I can't remember who is acting mayor at that.
I believe it's Councillor Lang.
Councillor Lang, will you be present that weekend to be able to participate in the event and on the Saturday morning?
Yes.
Okay. Great, thank you. Just so you're aware that you're on, because it would be either normally be myself and Councillor Leafwood has done it in the past. And I think that was maybe because you were acting mayor. Yeah. So if you could do that, that would be fantastic.
I'll confer with staff, but I might be using everything. Sorry.
All right. So we passed all those motions, so, or that motion. So the next is that that council dissolve into committee of the whole to discuss the preparation of the 2023 annual report. Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Bird. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. All right. So CEO Baker has even though he's not in Kaslo, has been able to put together a draft for the annual report. Did you want to hit on any certain spots, or did you just want to entertain? Well, because we've just gotten it tonight, so it might be a good idea actually for you to run through it for us, and then it might prompt some questions. If that works for you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Hewitt. I appreciate it. So being my first year here in Kaslo, I'm not entirely sure the process that council has gone through for providing input, but what I gather is that we have our strategic priorities for 2023 through 2026. And what it looks like to me is that each year we're taking a handful of those strategic priorities that are discussed with council and you've provided input and given some direction. And so again, it looks to me like the previous CAOs would have taken the work that you've identified as priorities for that year and reported on it within this annual report. And I don't know if you've actually taken time to reassess priorities or change them or add them as part of developing this annual report. Would council be able to provide any clarity there for me, just so I know how to proceed and what to do here?
Typically, well, what we've been doing is having both this. Well, last year it was a summer. I think we had a priority setting session. So it would have been post the annual report, and the other one was in the fall.
Okay.
And with the aim to putting budget to those items that we felt were important. So
Okay.
I think this just puts them on paper, as far as I remember, for the public to see what the priorities were that council discussed. And in theory, they should be in the budget, otherwise they shouldn't be considered priorities in this document. Right.
Okay.
But
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. Appreciate it. So sounds like I understand how things have come to be. So in that respect, if we flip to the section titled Statement of Municipal Objectives and Measures for 2024-2025.
okay, so page 7.
Page 7. And what I'd like to do is, I'm going to ask for some input, but first I'm going to share with you how to read this. So items that are in black. So we can start with the first one, develop an asset management plan, and then it's got 4 tasks associated with it. That's nothing new. That's something that you would have known from your corporate strategic plan that's already been developed. And so anytime you see something in black, it's not new to you. You already know about it. It's something that I've pulled out of your corporate strategic plan and I've just identified here. I have highlighted or added a column, I would say, for assigned. And really that's for staff to figure out who's going to do this work. So MSI would be the manager of strategic initiatives that we have for this year. And our CAO, I think you could figure out. The manager of corporate services, MCS, would be another set of initials you'd see. So that's just saying which staff member is responsible for this. And there will be items where we don't actually assign it to a staff member because it's simply council providing advocacy. So there might be items on here. Let's say we want to advocate for seniors housing or low income housing. Well, there might not be much that a staff member actually needs to do. It's simply council's there providing advocacy. So there might be some of those, but that's what that column is on assigned. That's just who's going to do it. The other thing to identify for you is items that are in red would be items that staff have identified over the last couple of months since I've been with the village that I think we should try to take a run at to complete before the end of the year. And so most of them are going to be assigned to the CAO. It's work that I would like to try to get done in order to set us up for some success in 2025, 2026 for the remainder of your term. And we'll go into details on them in a moment. Then there's items which, I think that's good. Okay. There are some items that are in black. So items that you're already aware of. And I'm not entirely sure what the timeline is for them. Meaning council might take a look at the item and think, maybe that's not the highest priority for 2024. You'd give us some flexibility and let us push it off maybe to 2025. So I think there'll be some opportunity for discussion on any of them where I've highlighted the word timeline. So with all of that said, do you think we could go through each of these objectives and have a bit of discussion? and I'll take notes based on your discussion and any feedback you'd like to give on what's a priority, anything you want to move off, or could that work for you?
Yeah, and I think the other thing we want to keep in mind is staff capacity. We can have all these grand thoughts, but or can we assume that you put them in a year where you feel there is staff capacity to carry these projects forward if council decides that, yes, they are priorities, or are there some that we should shift so that it doesn't put undue pressure on staff?
I appreciate that, Mayor Hewitt. I think there are some items that, whether it's for staff capacity or just the logistics of getting the work done, it might make sense to identify that that's a 2025 priority. And that's totally fine, because this section of the annual report, it's not simply for 2024. It's also for 2025. So it's really the next year and a half. Let's prioritize and figure out what's going to go in what year. There are also a couple of items I forgot to mention that councillors have brought up, or the mayor. So I believe Councillor Leithwood has identified an item or two, and Councillor Lang. So those are captured in here as well. And then, as this is a draft, what my hope is to receive feedback from you. We have the discussion about staff capacity and priorities, and then I come back to you at your next council meeting and provide you with a refined list of our objectives and measures for the next year and a half. So not looking to finalize anything today, really just get discussion going and commentary. There's other items that I need to add to here. There's capital projects which are in the works that aren't identified on here at all. And there's also priorities of the manager of corporate services that have been given to me by that staff member, and I have not included them on these objectives and measures yet. And to go one step further, there are dozens of items within the 2023 to 2026 corporate strategic plan that are not identified on here at all either. So there's so many items amongst all these different sources that it's absolutely, we're going to have to make some choices about the next year and a half.
Councillor Leithwood.
To the chair, this doesn't take the place of our strategic plan that we would be meeting about in the summer or whenever.
Yes, correct. So this does not take the place at all. This is a reporting mechanism, information we're required to provide the province to show them that we're trying to be make improvements within our community and move forward. So if anything, it's your strategic plans are the core document, and we're just pulling out information from there and putting it into this report. But because we're halfway through the year and I've had a changeover in CAO, I felt like it might be a good time to touch base on where we're at with your strategic plans, and also offer you a few that aren't on there that I think might be important to try to do in the next 6 months, 18 months. Did I explain that okay?
Yep, thanks.
Councillor Bird.
Yes, through the chair, if we are going to be discussing this draft document, we have it up on the screen, and then that way we're not all like, what section are we on? Is that possible? And also for Valley Voice, that would be.
It's gonna take me a couple minutes.
Would it make sense for me to share my screen, or is it better technologically for it to be done locally?
It's probably gonna be easier if I do it because it'll show up.
Yes,
big.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Tammy. Um, not that this is gonna happen, but the power is scheduled to go out at 9 PM. So we have to be done before 9 PM.
Perfect.
But that's 2 hours from now, so
Yeah.
hopefully it won't take that long.
We're in 45 max.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, we can't share what we,
I
oh,
can. I just have to go about it. All right. How's that looking?
so did you want to be on page 7? The CAO
Well, why
vacant?
don't we, since we're scanning by page 3 here, we can just comment on, this is where the list of permissive tax exemptions would exist. This isn't finalized. This was just staff's first stab at identifying the organizations and the values for tax exemptions. So when you're reviewing this document on your own time, that's where we're at so far. And the next time we review this document, there might be some changes.
Can I just make one quick comment about that? Don't fret about the fact that we're using different numbers in different places. We know it, and there is an explanation. We don't need to get into it right now, but there are different ways of which taxes are being calculated. So when we, for example, when we send the letters to the various places that get a permissive tax exemption, they don't get a tax bill, and so we list what their tax bill would have been if they got taxed by everybody. Because although it's only the municipality that is supposedly exempt, it basically exempts them from all property taxes. So just be aware of that, it gets reported in different ways in different places and for different purposes, but it's not necessarily an error. If you have any questions about details of the specifics of it, happy to walk you through it, but it is also still going to change. Thank you.
Okay, and if we scroll to the next page, which I believe is page 4, there's nothing too interesting there. There'll be a letter developed by Mayor Hewitt that will include. And then if we go to page 5, what you'll see is a report on the objectives and measures from 2023. So to the best of my knowledge, these are the items from your strategic plan that were accomplished in 2023. And any of the items which we might have wanted to complete in 2023, but didn't get to, they've all been carried into 2024. Nothing's been lost. So 2023 would be page 5. Page 6 is simply an administrative issue or for disqualifications, but I don't think we had any, so we don't need to talk about that. And then we get back to page 7, which is our statement of objectives and measures for 2024, 2025. So what I'd like to say here is, what you'll notice is that all of the objectives on here are tasks that we'd like to do. And we measure the success by whether we've completed it or not. It's kind of a yes or no answer, which is fine and applies with a lot of the work we do, but it's not necessarily the intent of municipal objectives and measures. What the province originally intended 20 years ago when they mandated that we develop an annual municipal report was that municipalities start to have an internal process of constant improvement. So instead of having an objective that's either completed or not. What they'd like is a general objective. Let's say improve the standard of our paved surfaces, our roads. And then what we would do is we'd have a scale, let's say from 1 to 5. If a road is really poor and unusable, it's a 1. If it's brand new, it's going to be a 5. And so the council might look at the objective and say, okay, we want to improve our paved roads. We've gone around town and we've done condition assessments on all of our roads, and all of them are a 2 or a 3. And so your measure then, or your objective could become, let's make sure all of our roads are a 3. They're drivable and workable, and they're not causing accidents or damage to vehicles. And they're generally speaking, they're in good shape in the middle of their life. So the objective would be to have all roads at a condition assessment of 3. And we can measure that because every year we go look at the roads and we can say, yep, they're all at a 3. We're good. And it's if we go, when we look one year and we find, oh, these 2 or 3 roads are at a rating scale of 2. Okay, well then we're not meeting our measure. We're not meeting the standard that council set. And so with this type of approach I've just described, where we're actually measuring the condition of our assets in this example, it gives us a way to start driving improvement with our level of service in the community. So it's a slightly different philosophy or way to do objectives and measures compared to, here's the 10 projects we want to do this year. Did we complete it? Yes or no? So maybe I'll just take a pause there and see if there's questions about the different ways of doing objectives and measures, and maybe even ask for your input on if you have a preference. And what I might suggest makes good sense for the village of Kaslo is that we have a blended approach where there's absolutely some objectives we have that are going to be yes or no, we complete it or we don't, but we also start to include some items that we can measure. And maybe turn it over to council here and just let you provide your thoughts.
Any questions? Thoughts? Councillor Weekland?
To the chair, I think performing condition assessments are good because often people ask, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Like, why is my road not getting paved when someone else's is? So I think those are good. So those kind of assessments, who would do them? Like, would that be our crew or would it be a professional?
So I think, I'm not too sure if I've included it in this table yet, but let's talk about paved surfaces for a moment. So when I looked at the capital project, the $500,000 that was going to be on Front Street towards the seniors housing, and understood that, or I perceived it anyway, that was a priority for council and wanted to get that work done. The same question you just raised, Councillor Leithwood, came to mind. Why is this road more important than any of the others? And I didn't necessarily have a plan or a program or a document I could go to understand the justification. And so what I suggested to our public works foreman and our manager of strategic initiatives on site was that when we have a paving contractor come to site, I'd like them to be able to go throughout our community and perform an assessment of all of our paved surfaces so that we have a rating scale for all of our roads, know their age and condition. And then I can ask for budget estimates for all of the paved surfaces that might be coming due in the next 5 years. And I can start feeding that into our asset management program, as well as our discussions on capital projects. The initial assessment for our paved surfaces, I believe, should be done by a professional paving company so that they can set the criteria for which the inspections are being done and give us a baseline, even maybe some commentary and training to our staff, so that in years 2 and 3, possibly even years 4, we have our public works staff perform the condition assessment. And if things get drastically worse, we update our asset management program and perhaps need additional cost estimates. And then in year 5, we bring back the paving contractor who has expertise to update our condition assessments again. So my answer is, I believe it might make good sense to use contractors at the outset and then periodically every few years thereafter, but use our public works staff in the interim. Did I answer that question okay?
Any other questions or comments, Councillor Brown?
Through the chair. I like the fact that there's outcomes and achievements on there. Because just because a finished project, is finished doesn't always indicate that the desired outcome is achieved. So it's a good time to look to see that we got the outcome we were hoping to get when we put the project into place. And alternately, just because something wasn't completed doesn't mean that there weren't positive outcomes in the work to date. So I think there's certainly value to, yes, it's completed, or no, it wasn't. But I like that, looking at the outcomes to ensure that in the end, we're reaching the desired effect and not just checking off a box of something we said we'd do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic feedback. I think one of the things you would also appreciate then is when we take the achievements or outcomes from each of these projects, we use them to feed our next year's discussion on objectives and measures as well. So, and in that respect, this document truly becomes then, a never-ending document that has continuous improvement, because we're continuously looking at our measures, determining what the outcomes were, and then it continues to feed on it and snowball year after year after year. And I think in that sense, it crystallizes that idea of, it's not simply about establishing objectives that are yes or no, completed or not. It really does give us a way of driving continuous improvement.
Councillor Bird?
It's through the chair. I bet Catherine can answer this question, but maybe the rest of you can. I'm trying to find this word that is about what is the measurement that you're using to say that you have achieved your outcome, like that there is some kind of tangible way of measuring success. The word, no, sorry. So that it's one thing to say, I have this project in mind and this is the outcome I would like. But once it is halfway done or finally done, how do you know it's done? So there are quantifiable ways that objectively you can say this was done because we hit that milestone, that milestone, that milestone. But so how do you measure the success? What's the metrics? Sorry. What are the metrics of success here, so that you know when your outcome has been achieved?
Yeah, and I think
with everything.
I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. And I don't think you'd be surprised if I said it's different for each objective. There's going to be some that are yes, no, we completed it or we didn't. Paved roads are going to be different than water quality, or the number of accidents that occur at our intersections. You can imagine they're all going to be different types of measures we use. And so I'm just going to pull our attention to the third objective on the table. And if you look at the measures for that objective, the fourth measure says develop measurable objectives for annual municipal reporting. What that means is staff, hopefully by this time next year, have developed those metrics for each of our objectives. It's going to take time. At this point, I wouldn't say we haven't identified all of the different parts of our municipal operations that we need to start measuring. And so it's hard for me to tell you what the metrics are going to be. So that means between now and next year, I need to identify all of the different aspects of our operations that we should be measuring, which goes back up to the first measure that says develop a governance and operations manual. That's the manual in which I'm going to identify all of the different aspects of our operations. And then the middle two steps, the quality assurance program piece, that's where I'm going to start to be figuring out how are we going to measure it. And then we get to the fourth one. We can actually kind of put it into place, so to speak. So I've given us a bit of a process here that's going to take between now and maybe up to the end of 2025, maybe a little sooner, but developing what do we have, what do we need to start measuring, how are we going to measure it, and then put all those metrics onto paper for you to see. So whatever the objective says there, develop an annual reporting system that promotes blah, 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 all of that jargon is what I've just described. That's what that means. And so if there's buy-in from council with this approach, then those 4 tasks, along with that objective, are going to be what I'm going to start working on in 2024, and hopefully have for you within the next 12 to 18 months, if there's buy-in.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have one. Will we use, once this is developed, will this be used as a reporting format for council, perhaps on a quarterly basis, and reporting on, you know, percentage of completion of these projects? Some of them obviously, because they're multi-year, you know, they might not start right away, or they're not identified until another year, and this might also form the basis of our strategic planning session that we would have in the summer, or.
Absolutely. I'm not 100% clear on how to start integrating the strategic priorities with this objectives and measures and our financial reporting. I just have absolute faith that we can do it, and it's going to take me some time to figure out how to do it and exactly how we report back to you. I love the quarterly reporting idea. I think I want to give you quarterly financial reports that reflect the finances of where all these items are at as well. And what I'd really like is our supporting staff, our manager of strategic initiatives, and our manager of corporate services to also have an opportunity to provide a report on where they're at with all of these initiatives that are coming at them. So 100% quarterly reporting. I love to do it. And maybe I'll go one step further, is that it's fantastic for us to all talk about it and be on the same page, but ultimately we know this needs to get out to the public in some way, in a way that's digestible. Nobody in their right mind is going to go through and read this, you know, this long 4 or 5 page long list of tasks that we're doing and understand it to the same extent we are. So we've got to figure out a way through newsletters or a professionally designed annual report to communicate all of this with the public, so they know we're doing good work and they can understand it.
All right, so where else would you like to take us at this point?
Why don't I start going through the objectives and stop on the ones that I think you might like to discuss. Okay. And please, by all means, interrupt me if you feel like I'm kind of moving past something that you'd like to talk about. So the first objective is the asset management plan that you're all very well aware of and forms part of your strategic priorities. And what might be helpful is that there's 4 measures, or I'll call them tasks. There's 4 tasks that we need to accomplish in order to have an asset management plan. We're in the process of gathering asset data right now and inputting it into a registry. And over the next 18 months, I'm hoping we can have all that information gathered. There's grants that we're going to apply for and consultants will use to keep feeding the system. Once we've got enough information, we can start doing some condition assessments. So those condition assessments would start in 2025. And in the same breath, we'll perform risk assessments on those conditions. So just because something's in poor condition doesn't mean it's a high risk item. We might choose to leave it because it's a low risk item, even though it's failing. And then maybe by the end of 2025, but certainly as we enter 2026, the goal would be to have an asset management plan in the draft stage. And that plan is critical for us to be proactive with our financial management and planning for our aging assets. Is there any questions on the topic of asset management?
No, but I think the timeline is good because it'd be good to have it in place in 2026. So if there is a big shift in council, that it sets them up well, then they're not having to start from scratch with anything. Yeah, it gives them something to work on and refine as time goes on.
That's a good point. And I might say that if I was an elected official to, you know, if some of you weren't with us for the next term, having an asset management plan in place would absolutely be something you could take a lot of pride in hanging your hat on. There's a lot of communities who don't have it or aren't putting in the resources. But to me, if you walk away at the end of your term and have a plan in place, that's something to be really proud of from my perspective.
Thank you.
So the next objective is about our organizational structure. So one of the things I've noticed is that there could be some opportunities to improve our efficiency, the way we're organized, potentially who reports to who or what positions we have. You know that right now we have a temporary manager of strategic initiatives. And one of their core duties is putting this asset management plan together. And so we've got to figure out who's going to take us through the finish line. You'll notice that the final 3 tasks under asset management plan, they're not assigned to anyone yet. And that's because I don't know who's going to do that work. So that's an example of how we need to take a look as staff and council at our organizational structure and figure out how are we going to accomplish this stuff. There's also been stressors on municipal personnel, our CAO, and I've received reports from other staff that feel like there's a tremendous amount of work they need to get through, and that the way work moves through their positions, it's not always efficient. It's not always easy. And so there might be benefit to getting staff's input and helping us figure out what changes should we make. So we know we've had our consultant, our interim CAO and our interim CFO, our consultant Linda Tynan, working with us. And so what I'm hoping is that either Linda and I can get together before the end of 2024 and provide council with our thoughts and recommendations, or we hire a third party to take a look with clean eyes at what our organizational structure is and provide us with recommendations. I don't want this to be an expensive endeavor. I don't want the village spending $20,000, $30,000 to bring in some big firm to take a look at what we do. It's not that complicated. We've got 9 employees. So in some respects, I have a lot of confidence that Linda and I could put something together for you to take a look at, and it would be fairly objective since we're not, you know, I'm new and Linda's on the outside. But at the end of the day, I think it's up to council to decide where your comfort level is with having it done by us, or if you want me to get a quote from a third party, or if you don't think this is a priority for us at this point.
Well, I think if staff is identifying it as a priority and it's a staff related issue, we as council don't typically see the results of ineffective the ineffectiveness of the organization. So I think staff themselves are the best ones to assess that, but as far as resources to it, I think if you have identified it as a group, as an issue to be addressed, we should certainly make it happen. And Councillor Brown.
Through the chair. A few thoughts. One, I completely agree with what you're saying. We don't see those, although we do sometimes see lack of capacity due to things being harder than they need to be sometimes. Yeah, I think that's all I was gonna say.
Does council have a preference on whether it's something that staff look to complete internally, or do they have a preference for bringing in a third party?
Well, I'll let Councillor Brown have a supplemental.
And so through the chair, it was that. So I guess my personal preference would be, you're fairly new to the organization. Linda is also an outside party. One of the strengths, in choosing you as a CAO, I feel like is your organizational detail and the ability you'll have to be able to see this with fresh eyes and be able to put new systems into place. So for me personally, I would think that this isn't something we need to bring an outside organization in. I would be comfortable with you and Linda Tynan looking at it.
And I had Councillor Bird next.
Through the chair, yeah, I totally echo Councillor Brown on that one, and I have also seen the disasters that a third party coming in and telling an organization how it should shape up. I've seen disastrous results from that kind of thing, and I would be very happy if it was you and Linda. That would be just fine with me.
Councillor Knight.
Yeah, so through the chair, same for me. Yeah, I don't see the need for a third party.
All right. Sounds like you've got a potential path forward there then. All right. And on the reporting, that one is,
Oh, we lost Robert.
okay.
I think he might have missed the last little bit too, because he was frozen while you were saying
Oh.
path forward.
No.
So I'm wondering where he dropped off. We have a path forward. Delighted to know once.
Should see him try to read it.
Yeah.
And I'll check for it.
Looking at himself on the screen and thinking that he's still in the meeting.
Oh, it would have given him a notification that the call was dropped.
Right.
I have a question that maybe you can answer.
Yeah.
Here, perform risk assessments brings to mind there a provincially required thing called a hazard assessment. And that through emergency management and
Mhm.
stuff. And what's the status?
There he is.
Right. And
What's the
do
stat?
we have such a thing as a hazard assessment?
Oh, a hazard risk assessment
Yeah, I think it's to do with emergency.
planning.
Planning, yeah.
Okay. I think that perhaps CAO Baker can talk to that.
It's just below.
Because that kind of thing is, and the EOC is done at the regional district level. That will be in the works, but I think that we've, as municipalities, have requested that perhaps the municipalities get a presentation by the regional district on disaster mitigation and, not mitigation, but on the EOC and when they would get activated and how the municipality does play a role in that and what their role is and what the regional district will do. So I think it will be a collaboration between regional district staff and primarily our staff, because they'll be on the ground. We would have somewhat of a role, but a very reduced role, I think, other than knowing.
But we need to know.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wonder where Robert left off, like what was the last thing you heard?
I believe I heard you finish your commentary. You said you'd be comfortable with staff performing the review. And it seemed like right when you ended your sentence was when it cut out.
Okay.
Okay, but that's okay. And so just with Councillor Brown, so then Councillor Bird echoed his sentiments, as did Councillor Lang. And
Okay.
then I was saying, I guess that sounds like you've got a path forward on that objective.
Okay, I appreciate it. So we'll aim to have something for you by the end of the year. And we'll move from there. And so then the next topic or the next objective was the annual reporting, which we've already talked about. My general sense is that council's on board with staff working towards actual metrics and measures to help drive improvement.
Yep.
And that takes care of the administrative items that were on our list. The next is our buildings, facilities, and properties. Thanks, Catherine. And starts with an item carried forward from our corporate strategic plan regarding rural resident attraction. I believe we have a grant that we've received to help with some of that. And I believe, we're 6 months through the year. I believe there's supposed to be a meeting between the village and the grant funding body to see where we're at. And I don't have enough information at this point in order to comment on whether it's something that'll be completed this year. But my general sense is it's something that is not just this year specific. We'll do some work in 2024 and it might get wrapped up in 2025 as far as the grant funding is concerned. And the reason, or I should say, if there's something council would like to add on that topic or highlight it in some way, then please feel free to kind of jump in.
Councillor Brown?
The chair. I guess I would just note that you foster rural resident attraction by planning for housing development on village-owned land, and also under planning and development, the develop plan for Kaslo self-lands. I kind of see these as connected to each other. Obviously, the grant is for rural resident attraction. I would suggest that until residents of Kaslo have housing, that attracting people to our area would be a secondary goal to once everyone in Kaslo who needs a home. But I feel like that the planning for the housing development could be actually, like, to me, that this is one of the most important things that we can do this year. It's something that kind of keeps getting pushed back and pushed back. But I think it's something that I'd love to see less question marks and yellow highlighting and more of a firm date as to when we were going to start moving forward on this. Housing is obviously an issue that's, top of mind, has been since we were elected, and probably well before then, obviously. But it's something that I feel like we need to start putting firm timelines on and start moving ahead with these projects, because they're going to take years and years. It'll go beyond our term, and to start similar in the asset management to be able to get the future councils, to hand that baton off and have us been significantly moved forward on what that plan would be. And maybe not to shovels ready, but as close to as we possibly could get that. I would look at those two as married to each other, and I would suggest that this year would be a great year to start doing some of that work if staff had the capacity.
So that one is from a grant that was received, like, I don't know, was it 4 years ago? It's been on the docket for a long, long time, and I think it was fairly loose with a goal to do that, and we had talked about how the lands might be developed, and whether they're lots and how we would service that area. and whether the village would be their own developer, whether we hire somebody, but I think we're gonna be coming hat in hand to the funder to see whether they'll allow us to continue to keep it on. I don't think this could be a multi-year thing, unless we've heard anything.
No, I think we're actually waiting for an extension on the rural resident attraction. I think rural dividend we did get an extension on, that's Kaslo Bay Wharf and Aerodrome.
Yes.
So rural resident attraction, we submitted a request for extension and scope modification, and we haven't heard back. So we're waiting.
So it might not happen but generally they don't ask for money back, but we would have to have a firm plan in place to carry the project forward, I think, for them to really want to agree to it. Councillor Lang?
Yeah, through the chair, my question is, in what capacity is Ian Dunlop been retained? Is this a project that he could spend some time on? There's a real shortage of service buildable lots in the community right now. And the ones that are there are going for extraordinarily high prices, like unbelievably high prices. And we've got this land sitting idle. I think the time is right to release some of that land into the, for residential construction, but we need, again, to echo Councillor Brown, we need to get moving on this. It's, I think it needs to be a priority, at least get some numbers down on paper that gives us an indication of what's out there, what's available, what can be developed, what's it gonna cost, before we stick any shovels in the ground. So I'd like to see it become a bit of a priority and hire the people we need to make it happen. Thank you.
Is my video okay? Or can you hear me? Okay. Okay, all good comments there. So I've made a note here about Kaslo South. So maybe we can get through this list, and then maybe there'll be 2 or 3 really high priority items that are like CAO's got to get going on these things. Does that sound about right? Keep going through the list and keep Kaslo South high on the list here.
Say it's best not to mention names, right? You mentioned Ian. You probably shouldn't mention names, mention titles, contractor, right?
Okay.
That's, if you can undo this now. That was the only thing I wanted to say.
Perhaps I will share though that it's something that our planning contractor is looking at. And certainly it's a big project. There's a lot of moving parts to it. And not only, it's not something we can give to a contractor, it's going to require a lot of my time. So if it does kind of become the cream of the crop project, that's all good. That's great. I'll get working on it. We just might need to take a look at what are the other items that need to be moved off my plate in order to make it happen. So I'll go to the next objective, which was securing additional funding for the Rural Innovation Center. We know that we've received about $1 million for the Kemble building, and we're proceeding with that work. And there was a grant that we were not successful with. So if ultimately we want to complete the full scale project for the Rural Innovation Center, we're going to need to find a grant. So I think for me, it's simply a matter of assigning this to one of our staff members and telling them, go look for grant funding opportunities for the Kemble building. I don't know if council necessarily needs to make it a higher priority. I think it just needs to get assigned to staff. A particular staff person to actually do it rather than just being an item that's there. And then moving on to improving the grounds at the SS Moyi. Sorry, go ahead.
Just wanted to ask a question. I'm just wondering if you're muted? No, not anymore. No.
I think her laptop might be muted. That's all.
Oh, yep. That's on purpose. Whether, because the whole building isn't the Rural Innovation Center, that's a part of that building's use. Whether having that be the sole name of it, like whether we should rebrand the project, understanding that the Rural Innovation Center was the impetus for getting the grant, but whether that's it, because they're occupying a small part of that building, and it's more like a business incubator kind of thing, because we've got a bunch of small businesses that are in there. That's just a comment, whether that could be a hindrance in some respects, because some funders don't want to look at funding innovation centers at this point. That's not on their list of priorities. So look at what would make, what about the building and the building's usage would make it an attractive prospect for a funder. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I've made some notes there. Okay, our next project was the grounds at the SS Moy, and I believe that's on our radar. And I'm not entirely clear to the extent of the design work that's been done for the amphitheater, but from what I understand, there's money from the Front Street Park project through CBT that we're looking to move towards the amphitheater project. I believe there was a kind of a high level conceptual design for the amphitheater. And I believe we have some geotechnical engineering that's been done, but I don't think we have a detailed design of the amphitheater. So our goal might be to have a detailed design for the amphitheater by the end of the year. Catherine, do you have anything to add there?
You were exactly correct in your assessment.
Okay.
All right.
Every once in a while.
That sounds like we should be, since it's for the SS Moy, we should probably be bringing the Kootenai Lake Historical Society board in to see whether their needs or their desires for what that space looks like have changed from when we originally conceptualized it. I think that's still in their plan to have that, because it was spoken about at the, at least informally at the Heritage BC conference when they received their award, that they had spoken about it. So I think we need to definitely include them in discussions. Councillor Bird.
Through the chair, so that project, when you say it's there's money from the Front Street Park, that was that COVID funding, or no? I'm just wondering about the timeline on the funding for that project and whether it was transferable, and that's all.
Yes, it is, and I know stuff, but yes, they're one of the ones. It was funding from CBT.
Oh,
and because we were able to engage local contractors who did the construction. They were on time and under budget. But so we have just a few little pieces, and one of them is that the seating or the wall portion, and once that's done, whatever was left over from that grant could be reallocated to the Moy Amphitheater, but we just got to get that done, and so we can do the final reporting.
I think it was, the grant was intended to support the development of outdoor spaces. And so Front Street Park and the Moy Amphitheater share that criteria, and so that's kind of the connection. Because otherwise it sounds kind of randomized, like Front Street Park going to the Moy.
Yeah.
Is that outdoor space?
but supplemental, just any pressure on the timeline for that one. Okay.
Well, other than I think we need to finish
Yeah.
the
It's our own pressure.
yeah, and I think we probably should, because it's when we get that grant, we did the opening 2021, I believe it was, so for the outdoor performance space and the washroom, so it's been a few years. It should be, we should wrap it up, but I think there was problems securing contractors for the type of work that we needed done, and it might still be the same. I don't know.
Okay, so sorry, go ahead, Councillor Brown.
To the chair, I guess I'm wondering, how the decision to divert the funds that might be accessed to the, amphitheater project. Like when I look at parks and administration, there's Vimy Park, campground, logger sports, beaches. There's lots of other areas in the community. So I'm just, I guess, wondering, how the prioritization went.
Because that project was already in the development stage. It wasn't just an idea.
Perfect.
I might add some other commentary that the amphitheater project becomes an even more important because of the sidewalk that is, the subsurface is being compromised. And so the improvements to the amphitheater aren't simply a seating area, it's also some structural improvements to reinforce the sidewalk and railing.
Oh, great.
So I will keep the SS Moyie Amphitheater project in mind here as we move on. The next item is some capital works already in progress, renovation of the Kaslo Arena, including a feasibility of installing a commercial kitchen, ventilation upgrades so that the building can be used in the event of wildfires where we need clean air, and somewhere where folks with respiratory issues or even just a public gathering space for people to come to, as well as some accessibility upgrades. So all of that's in the works. It's being taken care of by our manager of strategic initiatives. And I don't know if we have to get into too much detail unless I hear from you. Go ahead. Good.
I think that's pretty, sounds like
Okay.
it's pretty clear. Yeah, thank you.
The next item is one that came forward from a council member I think you're aware of. It's related to using the Kemble building as a data center in the basement. And so the verbiage that's under that objective, I've pulled straight from the letter or email that we received from that private business owner. And I have to admit, I'm not well versed in what's being asked, but my kind of simple perception is that we have fiber optic coming into the building, and with the right equipment, it could be a place where data could be stored for private business or residents of the community. It's not necessarily something that the village of Kaslo itself needs a data center as a customer. It's something that would be made available to private business owners or people who need their data to be stored somewhere. And so what I'm perceiving is it's a private business asking if they can use that space for part of their business. And I might ask the corporate officer to chime in if I've misunderstood it. Or even council.
I think that's about right. And the other thing that has to be considered is just how that proposal ties in with the existing commitments that we've made to occupants, because we do have some very long-term agreements, like 25-year agreements for the with Columbia Basin Projects Corporation and in that basement. So, but I think that CEO Baker has a good handle on it.
So maybe just to add some further commentary, if this is an item that council would like staff to explore or get more information on, it's going to take time. And given the other seemingly higher priority items we've even discussed already, I'm just not sure when this would hit the mark. I think it's great and we should get more information. I'm just not too sure when to put the energy into it.
Councillor Lang has a question or comment?
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, we have a committee struck to more or less deal with these kind of issues. We haven't met for at least close to a year now, I would think. And all we're really trying to establish here is give the proponent an opportunity to speak to the committee and determine whether there is capacity within the building to support such an initiative. Obviously, generating revenue out of that building is a critical component. And the revenue streams have gone up and down over the years, but right now we're running pretty close to full capacity. But it's always nice to look at other opportunities to add more business to the structure, and that again facilitates upgrades and so on. So my suggestion would be that we look at having a committee meeting sometime over the next month or two to discuss this proposal, and without placing an undue burden on staff. I think it's just more of a sit down to see if there's a path forward on this or whether it's just not the right time.
Corporate Officer Alloy?
I believe there is an asset management committee tentatively scheduled for June 19th.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. Could someone echo it?
An asset management meeting is tentatively scheduled for June 19th. So we could possibly have that discussion at that point.
Okay. Could somebody let me know kind of what the general idea of the asset management committee is?
I think it's in chart. We look at all of the village assets, buildings primarily.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know how many meetings we've had, probably 4 or 5. We had one that was solely devoted to the airport. So we brought in all the pilots and hangar owners to have a discussion. That went well. We discussed public works facilities. And yeah, it's just to discuss what pending projects, what's in need of repair, where we can possibly expand, improve services, that kind of thing. So, but it's certainly okay to have a meeting where we just have a single topic discussion. That's oftentimes the most effective way of dealing with it.
Okay, thanks.
I do have a comment. I wonder if we should have, let the manager of strategic initiatives know, since he's overseeing the Kemble project, and to see whether that is something that should be looked at this time. If there's going to be construction, I don't know how sensitive that equipment is and whether there would have to be equipment moved, and I think the timing of it would be important. Investigating it would certainly be a good idea on how it would play out, but you don't want to have somebody invest time and energy into putting it in a certain location and have it put at jeopardy because of construction happening. I think that might be a good idea, and I don't know whether he'd be of value to have at an asset management committee meeting as well, to offer his input on that.
Sounds good. I made a note here that for 2024, let's have the meeting with the asset management committee, and we'll assign it to the manager of strategic initiatives as their area of responsibility. So thanks for that. The next item is making the courtroom on the second floor or third floor, I guess, depending on how you look at it, available for private rentals. So there's a few steps there that staff would need to work through in order to make it possible. All of them are fairly simple and easy, except for the acoustic treatment. It's always surprising how much those types of things cost. If I had to ballpark it, I might say $30,000 to have a company come in and do an assessment with their equipment and see how the noise moves, and then ultimately provide materials to deal with the echo in the space. That said, it can be done, that can be done in another year when funding's available. But I think what we could try to do by the end of this year is make it rentable. So we could have some kind of a wedding ceremony or something in that space. So we feel like we're moving forward with it. If that's agreeable.
That Councillor Leawood?
To the chair, this isn't related to that project, although it is. Because we're doing an accessibility plan, then how do we provide accessibility for, yeah. Should that be something we do look at in that plan though, like finding ways to access some of our facilities that aren't that accessible?
Sorry, through the chair. To respond to Councilor Lee, but I think that that is exactly what the accessibility committee is, what the hope is that they will focus on. Just identifying those barriers and then looking at possible solutions. And of course, once the plan is complete and gets adopted, then that does open up additional funding opportunities for items that are identified as projects in the plan.
I know when we first renovated, we had an elevator in the plan, but it would have taken out the entire children's section in the library, which already has very limited space.
And the cost.
And the cost, yeah, it shaved off a considerable amount of the budget. And this is one that I really would like to see completed, because the only reason we put the project over, achieved it with the last round of funding from Columbia Basin Trust was committing to them that it was going to be a public use space.
Yeah.
And we've been in here since 2018, that's when the renovations were completed and we moved back in. So I still think, even though they haven't said anything, and I think Councillor Leafwood shares this because she was involved with the project, that I think we need to do that, to honor that commitment and for receiving that last round of funding. And I thought that we had identified, what was that first amount of funding that we got quite a while ago, before the growing communities? There was another fund, and that's where we had earmarked these funds to come from. And that was several years ago. And I think we still have some left, but I might be wrong.
Was it a COVID restart funds?
It could have been COVID restart, yes.
I think it was probably COVID restart funds as a solution. And
yeah,
there are challenges with it, just because there are no washrooms that are available, like things like that. So, and we don't have a way to have people access the washrooms and still secure the offices.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, if it was easy, we would have done it.
Yeah.
Well, and things in the building have transitioned since we occupied, right? Because we did not have staff occupying those two spaces. Everybody was downstairs. So staff requirements for space have changed what's happening in the building. So it's not as feasible as it was, but I think people acoustically would want to be able to do that. Even when it was in ugly condition, we had somebody rent it to do a recording, guys. Yeah. And as far as the acoustic treatments, CAO Baker, we had one of the members of our Front Street Park Committee source the acoustic panels. He does work with the Langham on their performances. So he sourced those acoustic panels for Front Street Park stage. So he may be a good resource. We can get you his name or corporate officer Alloway can give you his name. Councillor Burke?
Question on that, without talking about the offices that are upstairs that you obviously want to have secure, can you have a public space without it being accessible? Isn't having an elevator and accessible washroom prerequisite for having an accessible space or having a public space?
Fire.
Not at the time.
This was 2018, then it was, it can be accessed, not by everybody, not every building anywhere is accessible by everyone. So the conscious decision was made to remove the elevator from the plan when the renovations were done on this because of costs and the implications for the library.
But if I can follow up, wasn't CAO Baker talking about that we could at least get to the place where we could rent it out as a public venue and that would satisfy, what CUT thought we were going to be doing with the building. But can you do that as a village, rent out any place that is not accessible or does not have access? I was just whether it's allowed.
Yes, you wouldn't be allowed to build it this way, but because this is a heritage building, there are some differences. I think the operational issue is the lack of toilets. So when the downstairs is open, the upstairs could be rented. But as soon as the downstairs is closed, because we're using the offices upstairs that have bathrooms in it, there's no bathrooms available for the public upstairs and they wouldn't have access to the downstairs bathrooms. So it's possible, but it's not gonna be suitable for everything. But I think that being able to do daytime rentals would achieve at least part of it. And then if there is huge demand, then that can be addressing the accessibility can happen separately. And if there's interest in having evening rentals for it, then we can look at what solutions would possibly work to achieve that. But I think CEO Baker is proposing that sort of like incremental approach. Let's do something.
Okay, no, thank you. That answers my question. I didn't know we could go incrementally like that.
Mayor would be willing to give up her office since she doesn't use it, so for a member of staff, so we could have a washroom available. So I think we can probably move on from that one.
So I just want to check in at this point. I know it's 8 o'clock and it's been a 2-hour meeting and I don't know how everyone's energy level's doing. Is it something that you'd like to continue with maybe for another half hour and I check in with you? Or do you think we need to adjourn for today and go back to our council meeting?
Well, I guess we do still have a short in-camera session, correct?
Correct.
So what are council's thoughts?
Let's wrap this up.
Okay,
Yeah, have a chance to look at it.
all right. Yeah, so there's a bit left, but are there any that council wants to talk with CAO Baker about right now, questions that might help them inform discussion for the next meeting we have? Then he has a heads up as to what he might need to look into for us. I've got a couple that I've put stars on that I think should be prioritized. And I think for efficiency, the information systems, which is the next thing on the list, I think for everybody, that seems like it should be a high priority.
How about I just highlight 1 or 2 projects and then we move out of this committee of the whole. And then council will have time to, do their best to understand or interpret the remaining items. Certainly come up with any of your other thoughts, and then our corporate officer will schedule another meeting to pull everything together. Is that okay if I just maybe like one or two that I think you might want to know about now?
Sure, that would be
Yes.
good. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to touch on the Parks Administration section, developing a master plan for Vimy Park, the campground, logger sports, beaches, skate park. And what I found was a comment about options for seasonal housing. And I don't know what that means, and we don't really have to go into it right now. But I'd say that it's an important one. And I think when we're talking about budget for 2025, that would be an item that I would recommend council consider funding for 2025 capital plan. So I'll maybe leave that with you and kind of let that percolate and see if that you do think that would be a priority. And then the other item would be Kaslo South that we've already talked about. A lot of moving parts, and to let council know, I've heard you loud and clear. Should be a high priority and start to get moving on it. So I'll start making some phone calls and try to start pulling this together. And based on the items we've talked about, plus the ones that remain on this list, I think it's probably all feasible with those timelines established. Summer 2024, summer 2025. I don't think it'll overwhelm staff. I think we can get it done. And I think that would wrap up my thoughts for you for tonight.
Councillor Brown.
Through the chair, the only other thing that I would highlight, and it's ties into the things we've already been talking about, but under community services, plan for new social housing project. I think that rolls into Kaslo South and rolls into the Foster Rural Resident Attraction. Like when we're looking at Kaslo South, we can be looking at a variety of different options, including a new social housing project. So I guess I would just encourage when we're looking at, some of these might be in 3 different areas, but they might all address the same thing. So I would just encourage staff when they're looking at Kaslo South to kind of think creatively and expansively, because a lot of things on here have the potential to be addressed and to find outcomes in that piece of land.
All right. So, thank you, everybody. And so we'll probably just do it if it's the next meeting isn't too jam-packed.
We need to present the annual report in draft form at the June 11th meeting.
Okay.
On our deadlines. So if there's no further discussion about this, we should schedule a special meeting.
Okay, but it has to be very quick.
Yeah.
Next Tuesday. Because, well, I don't think anybody was planning on having a meeting tomorrow night or the next night. No, and then we got Monday and Tuesday of the following week. Since if everybody wants to consult their calendars.
6 p.m.
The 4th. Okay, so well, maybe we'll set that when we go reconvene.
Reconvene and then set the special meeting.
All right. So, recommendation is that council now rise without reporting. Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Leafwood. All those in favor? Motion is carried. But we will take this opportunity to set a follow-up meeting for, to finish discussing the annual report, and for Tuesday, June the 4th at 6 p.m. And that will be a committee of the whole and for a single purpose. So I'll make that recommendation. Okay, I'm seconded by Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? And The recommendation is that council now recess and reconvene in camera with the public excluded under section 921C of the community charter to consider employee relations matters. Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Leawood. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Yeah. And